The Old Woman's Revenge. The year was 1953. I was only a child back then, but the story I am about to tell is not mine, it is my father's. A story so unsettling that even today, when the elders of our family recall it, silence falls over the room, and everyone listens with shivers running down their spine. Our village was unlike most others. It was beautiful, yes, green paddy fields stretching endlessly, tall palm trees swaying gently in the wind, narrow dirt roads winding between the huts. But what made our village different was the silence. There was an unusual stillness in the air, a strange quietness that hung like a veil over the fields and houses. There was no chaos, no rush, no noise of a busy life, only an eerie calmness, broken occasionally by the rustling of leaves or the distant call of a bird. The nights were even stranger. Once the sun set, darkness swallowed the village whole, and the silence grew so heavy that even a whisper seemed too loud. Life, however, was peaceful. People lived simply. My father was young then, strong and full of life. The villagers trusted one another, shared food, shared stories, and lived as if nothing could ever disturb their harmony. But one day, everything began to change. A family outsiders arrived at the edge of our village. They were Hindus, traveling with nothing but a few belongings. The family was small yet unusual. An old woman, her back bent with age, but her eyes sharp and watchful. 3 or 4 children clinging to her for comfort, and 3 or 4 middle-aged men and women, tired and restless from their journey. They begged for a place to stay, a corner of the village where they could find shelter. At first, the villagers hesitated. Strangers were not common in our quiet village. But my father, along with the other elders, decided that no one should be left without a home. After much discussion, the family was offered a place to live. From that moment, a new chapter began in our village. At first, it seemed like nothing more than an act of kindness, a gesture of humanity. But soon, that decision would bring with it a darkness none of us could have ever imagined. For a few days after their arrival, life seemed normal. The strange family kept to themselves, rarely speaking much to the villagers. The children played quietly near their hut, and the old woman, her face wrinkled, her eyes always searching, would sit by the doorway, staring into the distance. But soon, whispers began to spread. It started small. A gold bangle disappeared from one home. At first, no one paid much attention, perhaps it had been misplaced. But then, another family reported their ornaments missing. Then another. Within just a few nights, several houses had been robbed of gold, jewelry, and valuables. Our village had always been safe. No one locked their doors. No one feared thieves. But now, a shadow of doubt crept in. Fear spread from house to house like wildfire, and naturally, the suspicion pointed toward the newcomers. People began to talk behind closed doors. Who else could it be? They came only a few days ago. Since they arrived, nothing has been the same. Finally, the elders decided to confront them. My father was among them. They gathered at the newcomers' hut. The men and women from the family stood silently, unable to defend themselves. But it was the old woman who stepped forward. Her presence was unsettling. Her voice cracked as she spoke, but there was strength behind it, like a venom hiding under frail skin. The villagers accused them openly of theft. The old woman's eyes flared with something my father would later describe as hatred mixed with power. No defense, no pleading, just silence, except for the faint sound of the children crying. The decision was made. They would be driven out of the village. It didn't matter if they were guilty or not. The trust was broken, and the fear was too strong. And so, the family was humiliated, cast out, and told never to return. They gathered their few belongings, preparing to leave. But before they left, the old woman turned. She locked eyes with my father, her gaze so sharp that he said it pierced right through him. Her lips twisted into something between a sneer and a curse. And then she spoke, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. You will pay for this. I will have my revenge." The villagers laughed nervously, dismissing it as the empty threat of a bitter old woman. But my father, he remembered the way her eyes glowed, the way her voice carried an unnatural weight. It was not just a threat, it was a curse. That night, the family left the village. The silence returned once more, but this time, it was no longer peaceful. It was the silence that comes before a storm. And soon, the storm would arrive upon my father. From the very night that the old woman left our village, something began to change in my father. At first, it was subtle. He complained of uneasiness, of feeling restless even after a long day's work. He would sit alone, staring into the distance, as though listening to sounds no one else could hear. Then came the sleepless nights. No matter how tired he was, he could not close his eyes, and if he did manage to drift into sleep, he would wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, his body trembling like a man escaping death. When my grandmother asked him what troubled him, his voice would falter. "I see her, that old woman. Every time I close my eyes, she comes." At first, the family dismissed it as fear lodged deep in his mind. Perhaps the memory of her curse haunted him. But as days turned into weeks, the visions grew worse. He described seeing her standing outside the window at night, staring in with her sharp, lifeless eyes. Sometimes, he would see her sitting by his bed, whispering words he could not understand. And sometimes, most terrifying of all, she would come rushing at him with a knife, only to vanish at the very last second, leaving him screaming in the darkness. The villagers began to whisper. Some said it was only his imagination. Others believed it was the curse taking hold, the beginning of something much darker. Then came the night that proved it was no mere dream. It was late. Everyone in the house was asleep. My father, exhausted, had finally dozed off when he suddenly woke with a start. He felt a presence in the room. Slowly, he turned his head, and there she was. The old woman, not in a dream, not in his imagination, but inside the house, in the far corner, her bent figure barely lit by the moonlight seeping through the window. She did not move. She only stood there, her face hidden in shadow, her eyes glowing faintly like embers in the dark. My father froze. He tried to call out, but no sound came from his throat. The air grew heavy, and his chest tightened. In that dreadful silence, he heard it, a low, rattling laugh, dry and broken, like the voice of someone who no longer belonged to this world. The figure shifted, moving closer, inch by inch, and just as she was about to reach him, she vanished. The next morning, my father was pale, trembling, his voice hoarse. He swore on everything he knew that she had been there, standing in the room, watching him. From then on, the nights turned into a living hell. He could not sleep. He could not eat. The once strong and healthy man became weak and hollow, haunted by the shadow of a woman who should not exist. And it was then the family realized this was no mere curse of words. This was something darker, something that had followed him from that night of humiliation, when the old woman swore vengeance. My father's suffering grew worse with each passing day. He had become a shadow of the man he once was, his eyes hollow, his voice weak, his nights filled with terror. No one in the family could deny it anymore. This was not an ordinary illness. Something sinister was feeding on him. The villagers began to talk. Some whispered that it was black magic, others that it was the spirit of the old woman herself, seeking revenge from beyond the grave. Fear spread, not just in our home, but throughout the entire village. People avoided walking past our house at night. Even children refused to play near the courtyard after dusk. At last, my grandfather decided that help was needed, and so, they called for a renowned Islamic scholar, a respected Hujur known for dealing with the unseen. He was an old man, with a long white beard and piercing eyes that seemed to see far beyond the ordinary. When he entered our home, the air seemed to shift calmer, yet heavy with expectation. He listened carefully as my father described what he had seen. The old woman at the window, the shadow by the bed, the knife flashing in the dark. The Hujur remained silent for a long time. Then he spoke, his voice deep and steady. "This is not the work of the living. This is the work of the dead." Everyone froze. He explained that the old woman, after her death, had not left the world completely. She had used something dark, something forbidden. With the sindoor from her corpse, she had performed black magic, binding her spirit to my father. It was revenge carried from the grave, a curse designed to torment him slowly until nothing remained but madness. My grandmother gasped, covering her mouth in fear. My grandfather demanded to know if there was any way to break such a curse. The huger nodded, but his face remained grave. There is a way, but it is dangerous. If he fails, he will not survive the night. The family leaned in, desperate. The huger then gave his instructions. He handed my father 3 black stones and whispered into his ear a special prayer, a protection that would guard him if his faith remained strong. Then he said, on a moonless night, before the dawn prayer, you must walk alone to 3 different wells on the edge of the village. At each well, you will drop 1 stone. But remember this: no matter what happens, no matter who calls your name, you must not look back. Even if you hear the voices of your family, even if you hear my voice, you must not turn. If you do, you will not return. The house fell into silence. The instructions were clear, but the danger was terrifying. My father's hands trembled as he held the stones, their cold weight pressing against his skin, a reminder of the choice before him. The huger then looked him straight in the eye and added, "She will come for you. She will try to break your courage. She will use every trick to make you look back. But if your faith is stronger than your fear, you will live. If not, she will take you." That night, no one in the family slept. My father prepared himself, praying again and again, clutching the stones as if they were his last hope. Outside, the wind howled, and the darkness seemed thicker than ever. And as the clock moved toward midnight, my father stepped outside, ready to face the curse. The night chosen for the ritual was moonless. The village lay in total darkness, the kind of darkness that feels alive, pressing down on the skin, swallowing every sound. Even the animals were restless. Dogs barked without reason. Owls cried in the distance, and the trees seemed to whisper in the wind. My father stood at the doorway of our house, clutching the 3 stones the huger had given him. His face was pale, his hands trembling, but his resolve was firm. Behind him, the family prayed, their whispers filling the house like a shield. The huger's words echoed in his mind. Do not turn back. No matter who calls you, do not turn back. Taking a deep breath, my father stepped into the night. The silence was overwhelming. Each step he took crunched on the dry earth, louder than it should have been. The path to the first well seemed endless, shadows stretching and shifting on either side. His heart pounded so loudly he feared it would burst. When he finally reached the first well, the air grew colder. A sudden gust of wind nearly blew the stone from his hand. And then he heard it. A voice, soft at first, then clearer. It was his mother's voice. "My son, stop. Come back. Don't go further." His heart lurched. The voice was so real, so familiar. For a moment, his hand froze. But then he remembered the warning. He clenched his teeth, whispered the prayer under his breath, and dropped the first stone into the well. A scream pierced the night. Not human, not animal, something in between. The trees shook violently, though no wind blew. My father stumbled back, but forced himself forward, toward the second well. This time, the shadows moved. He could see them, figures darting from tree to tree, dark shapes that had no form. And then, from above, a chilling sound: laughter. Looking up, his blood froze. The old woman, she was there, leaping from branch to branch, her limbs twisted unnaturally, her white hair flying like threads of smoke. Her eyes glowed in the darkness, fixed on him, and in her hand gleamed a knife. She shrieked and lunged downward, rushing at him with inhuman speed. But just as she reached for him, she shattered into mist, vanishing into the air. Panting, my father staggered to the second well. He dropped the stone. The ground shook. A violent storm erupted out of nowhere. Trees bent under the force of the wind. Dogs howled as if possessed, and lightning cracked across the sky, though there had been no clouds a moment before. Through the howling storm, voices rose again. This time, not one, but many. His father, his brothers, his wife, all calling his name together, pleading, begging, screaming. Turn back, look at us. Terror stung my father's eyes. The voices were so convincing, so desperate, that for a heartbeat, he almost turned. Almost. But he didn't. He forced himself forward, clutching the last stone as if his life depended on it, because it did. The final well was the farthest. Every step felt heavier than the last. The storm followed him, the shadows crawling closer. The old woman appeared again, this time running beside him, her knife flashing. She shrieked in fury, her face twisted with hate, but every time she lunged, something unseen pulled her back, preventing her from reaching him. Finally, he reached the last well. His body shook, his legs nearly gave way, but he lifted the final stone. His voice trembled as he whispered the prayer. And then behind him came the most terrifying sound of all. My entire family's voices, together, crying, begging, screaming his name. It was not just one or two voices, it was all of us. As if the whole family stood behind him, calling him with such pain that his heart nearly broke. His hands shook violently. His instinct screamed to turn, but deep inside, he knew it was the final trick. With all the strength left in him, he flung the third stone into the well. At once, everything stopped. The storm ceased. The voices fell silent. The shadows vanished. The old woman let out one final, blood-curdling scream before dissolving into the darkness, never to be seen again. And then, silence. Not the heavy, cursed silence of before, but the calm silence of a village at rest. My father collapsed to his knees, tears streaming down his face. He had survived. The curse had been broken. When the night ended, it was as if the world had been reborn. The wind calmed, the shadows disappeared, and the familiar sounds of the village slowly returned. Crows calling, leaves rustling, dogs barking softly. But for my father, the ordeal was far from over. He remained kneeling by the last well for a long time, exhausted, trembling, and barely able to breathe. The stones in his hand now felt ordinary, lifeless tools that had saved his life. He whispered a prayer of thanks, feeling a weight lift from his chest, a heaviness that had been pressing on him for weeks, now dissolving. When he finally rose, the first rays of dawn were breaking across the fields. The birds' morning songs felt sweeter than ever, the air fresher, as if the village itself had breathed a sigh of relief. Slowly, his steps carried him home. Inside, the family was waiting, anxious and relieved. They had heard nothing from the outside, no screams, no voices, no storm. Only the eerie silence that marked the aftermath of something extraordinary. When my father entered, the entire house seemed to exhale. His body, though weak, felt lighter. He could sleep again. He could eat. His voice returned, and the hollow eyes that had haunted the family for weeks finally regained their warmth. The Huger returned the next day to check on him. He nodded solemnly, seeing that the ritual had succeeded. "She is gone," he said. "The curse has been broken. But remember, darkness like hers does not forgive lightly. Respect it, and it will leave you in peace. Forget it, and it may return in ways you cannot imagine." From that day on, my father slowly regained his strength. He never again saw the old woman, and the strange occurrences in the village ceased. But he carried the memory of that night for the rest of his life. The fear, the voices, the storm, they never left him completely. Sometimes, when the wind howled through the trees, he would pause, look around, and whisper a quiet prayer. The village, too, changed. People were more careful, more respectful of the unseen. No one spoke of that old woman lightly. And though years passed, and generations grew up unaware, my father never forgot that one night in 1953, when the darkness almost took him, and how courage, faith, and a few simple stones saved him from a curse that seemed unstoppable. And so, life returned to its rhythm, but the story lived on, a warning and a memory that the villagers would tell their children, a story of terror, survival, and the thin line between the living and the spirits that linger after death. Did you enjoy the story? Let us know in the comments. And if you liked it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Horror Dream. Want more stories like this? Subscribe to The Horror Dream, and we'll bring you more darkness, just for you. If you enjoy a little chill down your spine, stick around, like, share, and hit that subscribe button, right here on The Horror Dream. Your support keeps us going, so stay with us. Subscribe to The Horror Dream for more spine-tingling tales.